I never expected that a broken washing machine would turn into the start of something I'd been quietly hoping for since the day I moved in. It was supposed to be a quick visit. My landlord coming by to check out the issue before deciding if it was worth replacing. I hadn't seen him in months, just the occasional text about rent or maintenance, and honestly, I figured I'd be dealing with some repair guy instead. But when I opened the door and saw him standing there again, tool bag in hand, it hit me like it always did, quiet, low, and impossible to ignore. His name was Marcus. He was around 40, maybe a few years more, tall with a build that said he still did his own work even if he didn't have to anymore. Faded jeans, work boots, and a fitted black t-shirt that clung just enough to the curve of his arms. His salt and pepper beard was trimmed close, his hair still thick, just touched with silver at the temples. And his eyes, steady, dark, and familiar, landed on me with a little smile that made my stomach tighten in the way I'd long given up trying to explain. "Hey, Eli," he said, voice low and casual, like we saw each other every day. "Got your message. Thought I'd take a look before calling in someone else." I stepped aside to let him in, hoping he couldn't tell how fast my pulse had picked up. "Thanks." It started making this weird grinding noise and then just stopped. He nodded and walked toward the laundry nook like he remembered exactly where it was, kneeling down in front of the washer and setting his tools to one side. I stood a few feet behind him, watching the way his back moved beneath the shirt as he leaned forward, the curve of his shoulders stretching the fabric just enough to stir up things I'd spent a long time keeping quiet. We hadn't spent much time together, just enough small talk over lease paperwork and once when he helped me fix a broken cabinet door. But there'd always been a quiet tension between us, like we both knew something was there, just waiting for a reason to rise to the surface. "Still living here alone?" he asked as he opened the machine's front panel. I swallowed, suddenly aware of how close his voice felt. "Yeah, just me. Still not good at keeping plants alive either, if you're wondering." He chuckled softly. "Good to know some things haven't changed." There was silence for a moment as he worked, the only sound the light tap of tools and the occasional shift of his weight against the floor. Then, out of nowhere, he leaned a little further in, adjusting something inside the machine, and that's when it happened. I was standing behind him, too close, and when he bent forward, the shape of his body pulled the air right out of my lungs. Something broke in me. A thought, a boundary, whatever it was, it cracked wide open. I swallowed hard, trying to focus on anything else. But he turned just then, glancing back over his shoulder, catching the way I was looking at him. And he didn't look away. His eyes held mine for a beat too long. His gaze wasn't surprised. If anything, it was knowing, like he'd seen it coming for longer than I had. "Something wrong?" he asked, but the tone in his voice had changed. I took a breath, forced a small smile. "Was just watching. Sorry." He turned back to the washer, but the energy in the room had shifted completely. The quiet tension that had always hovered between us was no longer in the background. It was right here, thick in the air, humming like the machine he was trying to fix. Neither of us said anything else for a while, but we both knew the silence wasn't just silence anymore. Marcus stayed crouched in front of the washing machine longer than necessary, and I stayed leaning in the doorway pretending I wasn't watching every move he made. His forearms flexed as he worked, veins visible beneath sun-warmed skin, fingers moving with the ease of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. I didn't say much, couldn't. It was the way he shifted slightly, the curve of his back rising with each breath. He smelled like pine soap and metal, like sweat and heat and something faintly familiar I couldn't place but wanted closer. "Not as bad as I thought," he said, finally glancing up at me from where he knelt. "Might just be a loose connection." He stood, wiping his hands on a rag tucked into his belt. For a second, we stood close, closer than before. My shoulder nearly brushed his chest as I stepped aside to let him pass, but I didn't move far. Neither did he. "You still like it here?" he asked, voice low. He wasn't just making conversation. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, it's quiet, comfortable." Our eyes held again. This time I didn't look away. He took a step forward. "Not much. just enough that I could feel the heat of him again. "I'll need to run it once before I know for sure," he said. His tone was the same, but something in it made my skin prickle. He turned the washer on. The hum filled the room, but it wasn't the sound that made my pulse quicken. It was the pause before he stepped back toward me. He didn't touch me, but he was close. His hand brushed the edge of the counter beside mine, knuckles grazing. My breath hitched just slightly, but he noticed. "I'll stay a few minutes," he said. "Make sure it doesn't give out again." I nodded again, barely trusting my voice. "Okay." We stood there, shoulder to shoulder, while the washer spun and the air between us thickened. Hey, thanks for watching until this point. Please leave a comment if you're enjoying the video. It really helps us grow the channel and reach more people. And hey, thank you very much. Let's get back to story. It wasn't about the machine anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. The washer spun softly in the background, but neither of us looked at it. We stood in the narrow laundry nook, shoulder to shoulder, both pretending to focus on anything else. But the truth was settling between us now, heavy and warm and impossible to ignore. Marcus exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck, and I caught the glance he gave me from the corner of his eye. It wasn't casual. It wasn't curious. It was hungry, and then he turned, just slightly until we were facing each other. His expression was unreadable, serious, quiet, but his eyes lingered on my mouth, then moved back to meet mine. "You've been looking at me like that since I walked in," he said, voice low and calm, but far from neutral. My throat tightened. I should have said something light, made a joke, changed the subject. But instead, I stepped forward, closing the last inch of space between us. "Maybe you've been waiting for it," I said quietly. That was all it took. His hand reached for my waist, fingers settling firmly as he pulled me closer. And then he kissed me. It wasn't slow. It was firm and full and immediate, like something that had been held back for far too long. His mouth was warm, rougher than I expected, tasting of breath and heat and the quiet strain of restraint snapping all at once. I kissed him back just as hard. His hands slid up under my shirt, palms pressing flat against my lower back. I gripped the hem of his t-shirt, tugging it upward, wanting to feel the skin beneath. When it came off, I dropped it to the side and let my fingers trace along his chest, learning the lines of him. Solid, warm, real. He groaned into my mouth when my hands roamed lower, gripping the back of his jeans to pull him closer. His mouth broke from mine only to press to my jaw, my neck, slow and deliberate now, like he wanted to memorize every inch. "You want this?" he murmured against my skin, breath hot. I nodded, fingers tightening on his sides. "I've wanted it." His hands slid down to my hips, pulling me firmly against him, our bodies fitting like they'd always been meant to. Every touch, every kiss was thick with the kind of energy you don't fake. Too real, too built up over too long. We didn't make it far. The hallway wall caught us halfway to the couch, and we stayed there, tangled, kissing like we were making up for lost time. And maybe we were. We eventually made it to the couch, clothes shed along the way like they didn't matter. Marcus pulled me down with him, his body fitting against mine like we'd done this 100 times, like it wasn't the first. But it was, and the way we touched proved it. There was curiosity in every kiss, in every sweep of his hands across my skin, like he was trying to learn me all at once but slow enough to savor it. He hovered over me for a second, just breathing, his fingers trailing down my chest, then resting low on my stomach. His eyes met mine, steady and searching. "You sure?" he asked again, voice rough and quiet. I nodded, one hand cupping the back of his neck, guiding him down into another kiss. "Yeah, I've been sure." What followed wasn't rushed. It wasn't about lust anymore, not just that. It was quiet want, the kind that built over time, behind glances and polite distance. We explored each other slowly, every touch more confident than the last. His mouth found my collarbone, the center of my chest, his hands mapping the places that made me shiver. I let myself feel everything, the heat of his body, the weight of him, the way his breath quickened when my fingers slid down his spine, The way he whispered my name like it was something worth holding on to. When we finally moved together, it was unspoken, smooth, and filled with more than just heat. It was full of something intimate, something careful. There was no rush to get anywhere, just skin, breath, and motion, touches that lingered, kisses that deepened. His hand in mine, my body pressed to his. And when it was over, we didn't rush to clean up, didn't joke, didn't move. He lay there beside me, one arm slung over my chest, our bodies still tangled in the heat we'd made. The washing machine had stopped spinning long ago, but we hadn't noticed. Couldn't. Marcus let out a quiet breath, his thumb rubbing slow circles against my side. I probably wasn't supposed to let this happen, he said after a long stretch of silence. I turned to look at him, brushing damp hair from his forehead. Yeah, well, I probably wasn't supposed to want it. He smiled at that, a small, tired, real smile. And yet here we are. Here we are, I echoed, letting my hand rest over his heart. It beat steady under my palm. No one said anything for a long time, because maybe we didn't need to. When I opened my eyes the next morning, Marcus was still asleep beside me. The light filtered in through the cracked blinds in slanted lines, catching on the curve of his bare back and the soft rise and fall of his breathing. One arm was slung across my waist like he hadn't let go all night. I lay still, soaking in the feeling of being with him, not just physically, but really here, present, safe. His skin was warm beneath my hand, the same hand that had gripped my thigh last night, held my face like something breakable, slid across my chest with a kind of reverence that made me feel seen in a way I didn't even know I wanted. I traced small circles on his shoulder, slow and careful, letting the silence hold us a little longer. He stirred eventually, letting out a soft exhale and turning his head toward me. When his eyes opened, still heavy with sleep, he blinked a few times before meeting my gaze. "Hey," he said, voice rough and low. "Hey," I whispered back, smiling without thinking. He gave a quiet half-laugh and ran a hand down his face. "Didn't mean to fall asleep here. I didn't mean to ask you to stay," I replied. "But I did," he said, sitting up slightly. "And you didn't ask." He rubbed his fingers through his hair, looking around the room like he wasn't quite sure what came next. I reached over and touched his leg gently, grounding him. "You regret it?" I asked. His eyes snapped back to mine. "No. God, no." He leaned in and kissed me, slow and full, the kind of kiss you don't rush. When he pulled back, he rested his forehead against mine. "I just didn't expect it to feel this good," he murmured. "I thought maybe it was a one-time thing, built-up tension, whatever. And now?" I asked softly. "Now," he said, pulling back to look at me fully. "I'm wondering if I've been ignoring something I shouldn't have." We stayed on the couch like that, sheets barely covering our legs, tangled in each other and the warmth of morning. I made coffee, pulled on sweats, and watched him stretch in the doorway with that lazy confidence I'd always admired from afar. But now it felt different, like I'd earned a version of him no one else got to see. He stayed for another hour. We didn't talk about labels. We didn't talk about what this was. But we did talk. About music. About how he used to play guitar in college but hadn't touched it in years. About how I used to write short stories and never showed anyone. We laughed at how little we actually knew about each other despite having lived on opposite ends of a lease agreement for the better part of a year. When he finally stood to leave, he didn't rush. He lingered at the door, keys in one hand, the other brushing my waist like he couldn't help it. "You need anything else fixed?" he asked, smirking. I stepped closer, kissed the corner of his mouth. "I think we already broke everything else last night." He laughed quietly, eyes softening. "I meant it, Eli. I don't regret this." "I know," I said. "Neither do I." He pressed one last kiss to my temple, then stepped out the door and down the stairs, glancing back once before disappearing. And even after he was gone, the warmth stayed. In the air, on my skin, in the space where something real had just begun. The week after Marcus stayed over passed quietly. but not in a way that made me question anything. There were no dramatic texts, no sudden silences. Just space, comfortable, intentional space. And then, 3 days later, a knock at the door. I opened it to find him standing there with a box of pastries in one hand and a small tool bag in the other. "Washing machine still behaving?" he asked, half grinning. "For now," I said, stepping aside. "But I think the toaster might be jealous." He chuckled and stepped inside. Placing the pastries on the counter like this was something we did all the time. And somehow it already felt like we had. That morning turned into lunch. Lunch turned into hours of him sitting barefoot on my couch. Both of us talking about nothing and everything. He kissed me again. On the kitchen counter, one hand gripping my hip, the other tangled in my t-shirt. It was soft, unhurried, and full of that same heat we'd shared days earlier. But now it came with something else. Familiarity. This wasn't new anymore. It was ours. Over the following weeks, Marcus stopped by more often, but never with excuses. Not under the pretense of repairs or lease talk. Sometimes he brought groceries. Sometimes he just brought himself. There were nights he stayed over without planning to. Mornings we made coffee side by side in silence. His hand resting on the small of my back like it belonged there. He started leaving a toothbrush, then a hoodie, then a drawer. It didn't feel rushed. Felt right. One night, we sat on the back steps, watching the sky fade into dusk, our shoulders pressed together in the stillness. I looked over at him, the outline of his jaw catching the fading light, and I asked the thing I'd been holding back since that first kiss. "What does this feel like to you?" He didn't answer right away, but he took my hand in his, rubbed his thumb along the side of it, and finally said, "It feels like something I should have let happen a long time ago. We didn't need more than that, because what we had wasn't just about tension or timing. It was about showing up on the day the washer broke and on all the days after. It was about touching softly, kissing slowly, choosing each other in small ways over and over. And in the end, it wasn't about the machine at all. It was about Marcus, about me, about something that wasn't just fixed but something that would stay."